welcome to the deep dive. You guys sent in a really interesting set of sources this time around about the Science of Identity Foundation,
Yeah.
right, SIF. We've got court documents, social media posts, news articles, even excerpts from books. And wow, there's a lot to unpack here. And, looking through it all, it seems like you're especially interested in the role of Japa,
Also known as Joseph Bismarck.
right, Joseph Bismarck, also known as Japa.
Yeah, he seems to be a pretty key figure in all this. Definitely connected to SIF in a big way. Even owns homes in Kailua, Oahu, that Chris Butler, the leader of SIF, and his disciples use. But he's also gotten caught up in some serious allegations, particularly around his involvement with that controversial multi-level marketing company, QNet.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. For anyone listening who might not be super familiar with SIF, can you give us like a quick rundown?
Sure. SIFs is a religious group. It kind of grew out of the Hare Krishna movement back in the 1970s. Their leader, Chris Butler, he goes by the spiritual name Jagat Guru Sitaswarupananda Paramahamsa. It's a mouthful.
No.
But basically, he teaches about this idea called the science of identity, which boils down to the belief that our true selves are souls connected to God.
Okay, so it's all about finding your true identity through this connection with God. Makes sense. But it's interesting. We have this transcript from Butler's birthday celebration back in 1993. And guess who's the very first person to offer him well wishes and prayers?
Let me guess. Japa does.
Japa. Bingo. Talk about a dedicated follower.
Yeah, that's quite a statement, right?
It is. So how does someone go from, birthday wishes to being accused of financial misdeeds? You mentioned a court document linking Japa to QNet. What's the deal there?
Well, the Chinese police have actually accused Japa Das, along with QNet's chairman, a guy named Vijay Eswaran, of being involved in a money laundering scheme connected to QNet's profits. They allegedly tried to clean the money by investing in resorts and construction companies. And get this, authorities even froze Japa Das's Indian bank accounts.
Whoa, hold on. So we have Japa, this longtime devotee of Chris Butler, possibly mixed up in a money laundering scheme with the chairman of this controversial company. And on top of that, he's providing homes for Butler and his disciples. This is getting complicated fast.
It definitely is. And it gets even weirder when you consider that QNet has a history of changing its name after running into legal trouble. Like, they've operated as GoldQuest, QuestNet, VHAN Direct Selling, V-Dimension, and who knows what else. Seriously, makes you wonder what they're trying to hide.
Yeah, definitely raises some red flags.
Yeah.
Now, for everyone listening, it's super important for us to say that we are not saying any of this is definitely true or false. We're just exploring the information you sent us and trying to figure it all out.
Exactly. We're laying out all the pieces of the puzzle here, and it's up to you, the listener, to kind of draw your own conclusions.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper into Japadas's background. One article mentions him claiming to come from a broken family and running away at 9 years old. He ended up at a seminary type of school in the Philippines, living as a vegetarian monk until he was 17.
That seminary type of school could be referring to a school SIF ran in Baguio City. It was kind of loosely based on traditional Indian gurukulas, where children live and study with a guru. But here's the thing. Several former students have spoken out about, some pretty harsh conditions at that school, and they talk about this intense focus on Chris Butler's teachings.
So Japadas could have been a student at this SIF school. Wait, are we talking about more of an indoctrination center than a regular school?
That's what some former students allege, yeah. They describe intense psychological pressure, physical labor, and being completely isolated from the outside world. Some even say their time there was traumatic, accusing Butler and his senior disciples of exploitation. There's even a Facebook post we found that mentioned a factory where the children worked.
Wow, that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
If these allegations are true, it definitely puts Japadas' story in a whole new light. Going through that kind of childhood, it could maybe explain his unwavering loyalty to Chris Butler, even to the point of taking part in questionable business practices, right?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Trauma can have a lasting impact on people's choices. Of course, it doesn't excuse any wrongdoing, but it might help explain Japadas's actions.
Right. Understanding, not excusing. Okay, so we have Japadas, possibly shaped by a difficult past, deeply devoted to Chris Butler, and now allegedly involved in shady dealings with QNet. Seems like there's a lot more to uncover about all these connections. Ready to keep going.
Absolutely. This is where things get really interesting. So to really get the seriousness of these allegations against Japadas, we need to dive into the world of QNet and understand this whole multi-level marketing thing, MLM.
Okay, so hold up for a sec. Remember we talked about Japadas potentially attending that SIF school. For our listeners who might not know, the Gurukula is like this traditional Indian education system where kids live and study with a guru. It's kind of like a spiritual boarding school, right?
Exactly. And like the Gurukula model can be totally legitimate. But in the case of the CEF school, there are some pretty serious accusations of abuse and exploitation. And anyway, back to QNet. It's really important to understand that these MLM businesses, they're structured so that representatives make money not just from their own sales, but also by recruiting other people into the network. So it's like a chain reaction.
So you've got people at the top, they're profiting off the recruitment efforts of those below them, right? That structure kind of echoes the concerns often raised about MLMs, doesn't it? That the folks at the top often benefit the most, while those at the bottom struggle to make ends meet.
Exactly. And QNet, they've faced a ton of legal challenges and accusations of fraud in various countries. We're talking reports of people losing their life savings, families being torn apart, even cases of individuals being forced into, like, labor-like conditions.
Man, that's heavy. It's crazy to think that a supposedly spiritual organization like CIF could be connected to such a potentially exploitative business model. I mean, isn't the whole point of spirituality to move beyond material desires and focus on higher values?
Yeah, it's a bit ironic, right? And this disconnect between CIF's stated spiritual principles and their involvement with QNet, it's sparked a lot of controversy and criticism. You've got critics who argue that CIF leaders are basically using their spiritual authority to get rich and exploit their followers. Then you have defenders who claim QNet is a legit business opportunity, like it empowers people to achieve financial freedom.
But even if QNet says they aren't a pyramid scheme, there are still those legal issues, right?
Oh, absolutely. The authorities in India have been especially active in cracking down on QNet's operations. There have been multiple arrests, investigations, the whole 9 yards. Actually, the Indian government even issued notices to QNet for violating consumer protection rules that have to do with direct selling. And they even launched investigations to make sure the company is complying with those rules.
Wow. So, regardless of what QNet says, there are definitely some big questions about the ethics of their business model. And it gets even more troubling when you consider what it could mean for CIF's reputation and the trust of its followers.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder about Japa Das's role in all this. He's clearly deeply connected to CIF. He's providing those homes for Butler and his disciples. Yet, he's also allegedly profiting from a business that seems to go against the organization's core values.
It's like he's living a double life or something, navigating two totally different worlds. And it begs the question, what's his true motivation? Is he some kind of like savvy businessman exploiting his spiritual connections for personal gain? Or is he a true believer who's gotten caught up in a messed up system?
That's a really good question, and it's hard to answer. Remember that 1993 birthday recording we talked about earlier? Where Japa Das was the first to offer well wishes to Butler? That points to some deep, long-standing devotion. But then we see this alleged involvement with QNet, this company accused of preying on vulnerable people. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher. And it gets even more complicated when you consider the political side of this whole thing. Remember Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman, ran for president? She's been pretty open about her upbringing in SAF, how she follows those teachings. But her political career has been dogged by accusations that she's secretly pushing SAF's agenda.
Right, Tulsi Gabbard. She's a fascinating person for sure. And her connection to SAF has definitely gotten a lot of attention. Gabbard's publicly distanced herself from some of Butler's more controversial views, particularly about homosexuality. But a lot of critics are still skeptical. They point to her family's deep involvement with SUF and their history of anti-LGBTQ activism.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion, The deeper we go, the more questions we have. So where do we go from here? How do we even start to make sense of Japa Das's actions and what this all means for SUF and its followers?
Well, I think we got to remember we're dealing with allegations here and different interpretations of events. We don't really know what's going on in Japa Das's head, but what we can do is look at all the info we have, think about things from different angles, and encourage our listeners to be critical about what they're hearing.
For sure. We're not trying to pass judgment or give definitive answers here. We're just trying to guide our listeners through this crazy situation and give them the knowledge they need to figure things out for themselves, ready to keep diving in.
Absolutely. Let's see what else we can find in the rest of this stuff.
It really is amazing how one person like Japa Das can be connected to so many different parts of this story, from his early days as, a young monk to his involvement with QNet later on. Really makes you think about the choices people make, the paths they end up taking.
Yeah, and what's especially interesting to me is the seeming contradiction between Japadas's spiritual devotion and his alleged involvement in a business that so many people see as exploitative. It really
Mm,
makes you think about, like, what spirituality even is
right.
and what motivates people who claim to be on this spiritual path.
Right. It makes you wonder, can someone really be devoted to spiritual principles while doing things that seem to totally go against those principles?
Yeah.
Is it like they compartmentalize things? Or is there something, I don't know, deeper going on?
That's a great question. And I think it goes beyond just Japadas and Seth. It applies to all of us, you know? How do we make our beliefs and our actions line up, especially when those actions affect other people?
And what about Ceph itself? How does this all impact them? Can an organization that's so closely tied to a controversial business like QNet still be seen as a legitimate spiritual path?
That's tough to say. I mean, MSCF has always had its fair share of controversies, right? But these allegations against QNet and Japadas, they've definitely made things even more complicated. Some members might feel disillusioned by all this, but others, they might stay firm in their belief in Sif's teachings. Who knows?
It seems like they're at a crossroads. And what about Japa Das? What do you think the future holds for him?
It's hard to tell. He's facing some serious accusations in India, and his reputation's taken a hit, for sure, being connected to QNet like this. But he's also shown that he can be really resilient, you know? He's adaptable. It's possible he'll find a way through all this and come out okay.
I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with Japa Das and Sissi Adef. But one thing's for sure, this deep dive has uncovered a really complicated story. It raises some really important questions about how spirituality, business, and ambition all intersect.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even in spiritual communities, human nature is still a powerful force. Ambition, greed, the desire for wealth, these things can tempt anyone, even the most devout. And the consequences can be huge. They affect not only the individuals involved, but also the groups and communities they're a part of.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a few things to think about. First, remember to think critically. Don't just believe everything you hear, even from people who seem to have spiritual authority. Do your own research, ask questions, and trust your gut.
Yeah, that's so important. And second, remember that exploitation can happen anywhere, even in spiritual organizations. Just because someone says they're on a spiritual path, it doesn't mean they're immune to greed or unethical behavior.
Right. And lastly, don't be afraid to examine your own beliefs and motivations. We all have the potential to be both complicit and courageous,
Right.
misguided and enlightened. The choices we make, they really define who we are.
I think that's a great way to put it. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the world of Sif, Japadas, and the whole QNet situation. Remember, knowledge is power. And with this knowledge, you're better equipped to navigate this complex world we live in.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep asking questions, stay curious, and never stop searching for the truth.